Archimonde is on the floor with the rest of the battlefield, which is the sort of accounting error that ends empires. The soldiers call it done, but he is still breathing, staring at the fact that the line he built has failed, and the golden beam coming for him does not care about effort. He knows exactly what finished him too, and it is annoyingly specific. One knight standing there like a glowing trophy with a sword and too much confidence. Archimonde snaps back when told to surrender for the continent's peace, then spits out that all the knight bastards can go to hell before promising to kill every human with his own hands. Then he stops talking and starts doing the thing everyone in the room should have been more afraid of from the beginning. Necromantic power floods out of him, skeletal servants answer, and the battlefield gets the full rude reminder that this guy does not need to be healthy to be a problem. Archimonde keeps pushing, selling the slaughter as some noble duty for the future of children, which is a lovely way to describe mass murder when you are already this far gone. He drives his glowing weapon through the next exchange, channels summoning power through his own body, and fires a beam straight into the sky like subtlety offended him personally. That only drags in a larger disaster, because now he is manifesting a giant monster beside him and trading steel with a swordsman in midair. Even wounded, the necromancer keeps muttering that a necromancer does not die easily, and the whole exchange has the energy of a man refusing to stop being everyone's worst afternoon. Sumda shows up just long enough to say his name before a blonde swordsman gets swallowed by a dark vortex, which is a pretty rude way to end a conversation. After that, a massive dark form rises, and the answer is not elegance but a violent flash that blows the whole mess open. Klein's face fills the frame with glowing marks, and that expression says the same thing every serious face says right before a bad decision. Somewhere nearby, an older man clenches his fist under a hanging shadow, the sort of pose people take when they want to look deep while doing absolutely nothing useful. Now the story jumps to the man walking toward us with that same hard look, and he is already past the point of pretending this ended well. He flatly admits he definitely died that day, then reveals the ugly little miracle. His head got cut off, he woke up in a baby body, and his first words were the Archimonde necromancy incantation. So that is the trick. The feared necromancer is reborn into the discarded son of a famous sword family, then spends 24 hours praying while Garrison reads scripture about darkness and truth, which is a very patient way to build a monster with manners. He overdoes the handmade gift apology so hard it circles back into sincerity, the sort of thing you say when the tiny hands that made it are being defended like evidence in court. Garrison gets hit right in the feelings by a week of knitting and acts like he has just seen a miracle with yarn attached, which is somehow the most dramatic possible reaction to a hobby. Then the story cuts to a lineup of ranked figures, all shadow and hierarchy, with the 5th, 4th, and 3rd hanging there like a bad omen with a scoreboard. The next two reveals sharpen it up fast, a winged woman, then a woman with a luminous blade, and when Burkle is named while screaming in pain, the whole thing snaps into a fight he is already losing. Klein wakes in bed, annoyed at the world and at his own face, complaining that this hair still feels wrong. Then the ugly memory hits. He remembers being cut down by the sword of the Northern Knight, Burkle Rhyme. So the dream is not a dream, just trauma with better lighting. His attendant catches him muttering in his sleep and asks the obvious question whether he was dreaming about his days as Archimonde. Klein snaps upright and blurts everything, which is a lot to dump on one conversation, and then the old necromancer side comes roaring through as Archimonde starts barking orders to destroy the continent and kill everyone, while Klein rejects the command like it is some ridiculous typo. That refusal does not leave him empty though. Red flame-like power flares around the young lord, and the immediate solution is not heroism, but more training, because this body is clearly not built for the nonsense he is carrying. A dark figure looms near the small one. Then the gray-haired man gets challenged over whose side he is really on when somebody asks, "What do you mean art?" It is the sort of family talk that sounds polite until you realize everyone involved is one sentence away from drawing steel. The witnesses then call out the technique in plain text, saying it was the meteor sword used publicly. So the secret is not exactly staying secret. Klein immediately asks why the Branch family showed up again, which is fair since they keep arriving like they pay rent. Now the current family head gets introduced to his father, and the narration makes the ugly little point that Dellen's existence is probably the father's last reason to feel proud. Dellen apologizes anyway, dragging his own worth through the mud, while the father talks him back up and acts like there are plenty of paths besides the sword, even if the whole setup says otherwise. Klein heads through an ornate hallway and starts to say goodbye, but Dalton grabs him by the collar and shoves him around like he already decided how this conversation ends. Klein pushes back and gets hit with the whole "will money stop the rumors" lecture. Then the realization lands in his eyes like a blade finding a gap. Before Dalton can keep going, someone cuts in and tells him to stop, and the grand hallway fills out with enough bodies to make the tension look expensive. Dalton still manages to hurl an insult at Klein, and even throws in that he should be grateful his escort knight saved him, which is a funny thing to say while standing there acting like a problem. After that, the pair move down through a rocky, mist-choked stretch with those weird geometric symbols hanging around like the place has terrible signage. An elder hands Klein a sword, and then at the entrance, Klein tells his companion to go ahead while he checks something first, which sounds calm right up until the narration drops the real problem. Klein's body has no mana at all. Meteor Sword, the Duke's family technique, gets explained like it's some noble heirloom and not a move built to ruin somebody's day. Then comes the part that matters. Recreating it by brute force is impossible, which is exactly the sort of sentence that makes our boy perk up and think, oh, so there's a trick. The trick shows up a second later when magical energy surges and Meteor Sword starts taking shape in full. Klein freezes as the blade fully manifests in the white-haired swordsman's hands, which is a nice reminder that some people get a family technique and some people get a headache. The white-haired man squints at Klein and asks who he is right before the whole exchange turns ugly in that fast, sharp way these confrontations always do. Then the invitation lands out of nowhere. A hunting competition offers so polished, it almost hides the fact that it comes right after a public scene at the training grounds. And Klein accepts with the world's driest commitment. No reason to refuse. A dark sword sits on a stand while two figures crash into each other. And the official nearby is already talking carriage prep like this mess is an item on a schedule. Another authority figure watches with that knowing look people get when they're about to say something ominous and very unhelpful, which is apparently the local hobby. Then Klein gets swallowed by cyan energy, runes, and a spinning vortex that looks less like magic and more like a bad decision reaching critical mass. The witnesses panic over how he can do anything without mana. The power spikes into geometric lightning, and the room gets loud with the exact kind of fear people say for things they absolutely cannot explain. He answers by speaking an incantation to the ancient evil spirits buried under time, which is a very specific workplace request. The summon arrives in layers of cyan smoke and bone, a massive monster with a skull face, then a full skeletal body, and the thing repeats the only word it seems to know, devour. That gives the dead a job to do. Skeleton spirits swarm out roaring, tearing into everything in reach while Klein orders them to devour all of it. Because subtlety is for people with fewer corpses on payroll. Later, someone looks at the collapsed barrier and mutters that Klein must be a bloody pulp now, which is the sort of confident statement that ages badly on contact. Across the storm, skeletal armored figures stand with weapons ready, orange-eyed commanders surveying the field, while the white-haired fighter ends up staring down towering undead ranks like he just walked into a very bad accounting problem. Klein, meanwhile, reflects that 200 years is a long time, which is one way to describe surviving long enough to turn the whole battlefield into your personal graveyard. Our boy's still here, still standing, and if anyone thought death magic was going to stay buried, well, they should have checked the bones first. Klein looks over the skeletons and notes that nobody even recognizes them anymore, which is a funny way to say he has upgraded his dead soldiers past the point of casual identification. He even has to explain they used to be normal skeletons before cutting himself off, then drops the real flex. These ones are different. He snaps out the order for the first defensive formation, and the answer is immediate enough to make the enemy regret having eyes. His hands shift as the spell takes hold, the opposing fighter blurting in shock while the skeletons start moving like they have somewhere better to be than the grave. The whole line crashes forward, and Klein goes with them, hammering straight into the defenders while his troops flood the gap. In the middle of the chaos, he starts carving through skeleton soldiers, which is always a strange thing to watch when the guy doing it is on the same side as the undead. The commander tries to salvage the mess by ordering a second crossbow unit to surround them, then tells the squad to prepare to fire, and just plain fire already. The bolts rip into Klein as he ducks behind cover, and he realizes the problem fast. These skeletons do not behave like the ones he knows, which is a lovely detail to discover while being shot at. He calls for his troops to ditch the crossbows and switch tactics before they get wiped out, then starts a sentence with these, like the rest of that thought is going to be good news. Instead, he jumps into direct sword combat and takes one skeleton's head clean off, only for the thing to put the head right back where it came from. Two undead close in together, one rising higher with those eyes burning brighter, and Klein finally says it out loud. It can reattach its own head. Now he is staring at a whole horde of identical regenerating nuisances, so he squares up and says, basically fine, then let's do this. A glowing sword slams between two fighters with a shout of pain, and the next beat is all heat and pressure, with someone muttering that he is the warmest person in the world, like that somehow helps. Blood or rain streaks across a close-up of torsos and arms, then a skeletal figure gets knocked back hard enough to matter. A white sword beam slices through multiple enemies mid-air, and then a dark curved thing fractures under a purple surge while the power keeps building, complete with the dramatic eye nonsense stamped over it. After that, two figures collide in a reddish-golden embrace or impact, and the last image is pure close-range sword work with purple lightning snapping between them, like both of them decided subtlety was dead. A purple beam knifes cleanly between the two fighters, splitting the vertical gap like neither of them had room for pride anymore. One of them follows with a sword rush that leaves blood streaks in the wake, and Archimonde's eye flashes purple as he keeps pushing through the exchange, all of it headed straight for the judgment stage nobody asked for. Archimonde stands over Dalton's wrecked body and casually hits him with the most insulting line possible, like this is a lecture and not a beating. Then his hand floods with bright blue magic. The glow looks clean enough to be polite, and the next thing he does is collapse flat on the ground like the bill finally arrived. He comes back in fragments, one eye lit in shadow, then the fist tightens, the ground gets punched, and suddenly he is sitting in a throne-like chair with that small poisonous smile that says the worst part is still ahead. He's breathing hard and looking wrecked, but the story immediately cuts to why he is like this in the first place. A young man points a bow at a creature, while the narration says these bastards routinely abuse them under the excuse of hunting. Back in the fight, the blade work gets ugly again, and Archimonde tells Dalton he is already dead. He keeps talking while power surges around him. Then he unleashes a horde of beast creatures that slam into Dalton and start tearing him apart, as if the proper response to arrogance is a pack of nightmare animals with no manners. A green burst drives deeper through the victim while the line about the lives he took hangs in the air, and Dalton's body starts glowing, cracking, and screaming under the strain until the whole thing tips into pure collapse. The masked figure's eye with those nasty spikes is the last thing left on screen, which is a pretty rude way to document someone getting deleted. Cut to Klein on a storm-bashed hilltop, sword drawn, with undead skeletons lurching up behind him and wheezing like they missed the memo on dignity. He promises to break the curse binding them and give them freedom, and the skeletal form answers in full-body cyan glow while asking, almost impressed, if he really does wield necromancy. Klein has that tiny internal panic of a man realizing the witness saw the one thing he absolutely did not want seen. He shuts it down immediately with, "You don't need to know," which is a great line if you enjoy pretending your secrets are a legal concept. Then the masked warrior goes to work on a prone corpse, carving down with cyan magic, bursting off every hit, and keeps hacking at it like the body owes him money. The narration spells it out with zero mercy. Revival art controls corpses, and the attacker is a necromancer, which is exactly the sort of reveal that makes polite society start reaching for torches. Archimon does the obvious necromancer thing, and immediately starts thinking about fresh bodies to work with. Dalton failed, sure, but these corpses are still standing around, being useful in the worst possible way, which is basically a performance review for the dead. On the other side, Dunkel spots a signal magic scroll, and the mood shifts from messy to actively bad. The group is already moving, but he gets told to wait right there, which is a lovely thing to hear when everyone looks like they're about to disappear into a trap with nice paperwork. Then the escorts show the Conwell family crest, and the whole setup clicks into place. Dunkel doesn't bother pretending this is a misunderstanding, and the young master snaps into command mode with the very calm voice of a man who just realized the people around him came with ulterior motives and paperwork to match. A knight pulls Arin in close and tells her to listen carefully, then orders her back to the mansion with the priest. He's reading the situation fast now, and the next line lands like a nail in the floor. This was not a coincidence after all. He checks a glowing mark on the cloth, then admits the ugly truth. His magi is completely drained from the earlier fight, so necromancy is off the table, and in this state he won't last long anyway, which is a fun little summary of how bad the day has gotten. And then the command drops, eliminate young Master Klein. The enemy wave closes in, soldiers rushing him from every side, and the guy goes from tense to full survival mode in about half a second, which is still somehow more preparation than most of these ambushes get. He hits a trigger on a powerful artifact or technique, and the whole thing erupts with the sort of force that makes the next few frames look legally unsafe. The knight is suddenly in close combat, sword out, carving into the melee while bodies, grips, and bad decisions pile up around him. Some grotesque masked thing looms over a figure, all jagged teeth and dark framing, like a nightmare got bored and started decorating. Right after that, the sword aura kicks in hard, and Archimon's blade starts turning the battlefield into a very expensive correction notice. A massive strike drops straight down, then slices through multiple foes, and the warrior's face catches the light like he is personally offended by everyone present. More slashes tear across the space, bodies fall through a golden field, and the blade crosses his face in close-up right before the whole formation starts collapsing. Elsewhere, a robed religious figure stands before an ornate altar. Then a silhouette looms over a fallen warrior, while a cold line lands about the order and who was capable. The next beat is all motion and no mercy, as figures plunge through a golden vortex, keep falling through the light beam, and get launched by an upward slash that sounds like it hurts on principle. The exchange stays vertical and ugly from there, with harsh impacts and grunting all the way through. Then Archimon snaps into a two-arm combo, chaining strikes together like he's done listening to the enemy's opinion and wants the problem reduced to pieces now. The blade meets another blade at ground level, and the whole exchange finally stops pretending to be elegant. The hit sends the enemy's body snapping back with that ugly, warped recoil that says the damage landed cleanly. No poetry required. Then a masked enemy takes a golden strike straight on, while the warrior holds steady and keeps the pressure on like his feet are nailed to the floor. Even with allies visible below, he doesn't budge, just stares through the light and tells them to beg and plead before he decides what mercy is worth. He draws in for something bigger and then drops a baptism of fire on the whole mess. Three beast-like things claw out of the aftermath, making that nasty little queak noise like the attack just coughed up extra problems for free. Elsewhere, a glowing-eyed figure has a masked man by the collar and asks where he thinks he is going, which is a fair question when the answer is clearly nowhere. They trade blows, the masked man can barely breathe long enough to complain that he has not finished the prayer yet, and then some surge of power bursts out of him like panic finally got a spine. After that, the narration slows down just enough to rub it in. He merely takes a step, merely walks forward, and somehow that is enough to make everybody else feel like the room got heavier around him. Hours into the questioning, Klein still has not changed his statement, which is a rough way to spend a day, and an even rougher way to learn your alibi is dead on arrival. He spots evidence left behind, curses the idiots who were told not to leave any, and decides the next cleanup job starts with the Branch family bastards who messed with him. Then the whole mood turns feral as skeleton-like armored things grind and growl in the dark. A tall man drags a blonde woman along and tells her to hurry up and follow, while explaining that her aunt is Duke Paul Wyvern's second wife, so Laya is her cousin, meaning biologically, yes, this family tree is already making enemies on sight. He says from here on, it is just personal curiosity, which is the exact phrase people use right before they stop pretending this is normal conversation. The hand lands too close, she freezes. A blurred figure with a red core flickers into view, and she snaps that it is not simple curiosity, which is putting it mildly. He tries one last ridiculous angle and asks what if he is Archimon yet, and she practically laughs in his face before dismissing it outright. Then her expression sharpens, she notices the internal damage is far too severe, and declares the whole situation over because he is neither Archimon nor even properly human anymore. In the Grand Arena Hall, someone finally admits he got complacent, which is the sort of line that usually arrives about 10 seconds before everything gets worse. A figure swings a staff with violent impact. The woman flinches, and the hit lands like the conversation just got interrupted by physics. Archimon plants himself, sword in hand, and the whole posture says he's done talking for the moment. He throws the fight into the open and privilegied a northern-style duel, clean and brutal, no excuses attached, which is a cute way to say everyone gets to swing until one verdict survives. While the white-haired woman stays framed and unreadable, the paperwork side of the room starts wobbling. The purple-haired man sees his opening, declares the evidence void, and the duel gets locked in for 4 days, which is exactly the sort of legal gymnastics rich families use when nobody wants to say the quiet part out loud. The woman's silence says more than anyone else's speech, and then she lays out the real plan. She is going to completely overhaul this family. Archimon leans into it with the same dry certainty he uses for everything else, making it clear he is in this for her, not for the room full of rotting old rules. She asks why he is still trying to jump into the combat trial when he's the heir and should be sitting pretty, which is a fair question if you ignore all the blood and spite in the room. He answers that he has no reason to hand this over to her, and then a servant steps in and swears loyalty to Klein, so at least one person in this mess knows where his feet are. Then the story cuts to the knight everyone's been talking around. He is an excommunicated Imperial Knight who made a name for himself in battle, which sounds impressive until the reason for the excommunication starts drifting into view with a bucket full of blood and the label uncontrollable bloodlust, like the paperwork was already written before the screaming stopped. Inside the blood-soaked chaos, the knight thrashes and snarls, trying to hold himself together while the whole body goes feral on him. A transformed hand clamps onto a barrel, the beast form keeps pushing through, and this guy is clearly one bad breath away from becoming a full disaster with armor. Someone up top recognizes the young master of Rhinelandi and casually hands over the sword he asked for, which is the calmest possible way to deliver a weapon into a nightmare. The white-haired man takes it without drama, while Lady Helion watches from afar and calls the bastard useless right to his face, and then she ups the stakes by dangling her lips as a reward if he beats the knight. Classy, efficient, unhinged. The pressure hits, and the fighter gets launched back as a spiral of force blooms behind him, like the fight itself got tired of being subtle. Steel starts crossing steel at close range, dark strikes snapping through the clash, and he locks in with a grim little monologue about how this is not the time to play nice or act like he has options. He runs the math in real time, giving them a legal excuse to kill the Rhineland heir opens a door, and his family's fate is sitting right on the edge of that decision. So he stops pretending he can afford restraint, commits to the move anyway, and fires off a technique meant to end the argument before the room can invent a new one. Archimon's answer comes out in a purple flare, a raw burst of force that slams straight into the defense in front of him and turns the whole exchange into one ugly collision. The blast backfires in his face, smoke and impact chewing up the space between them, but he snaps out of it and slips the next incoming strike like he already decided getting hit would be too embarrassing. Then he throws up a golden glow, the sort of power that looks almost clean until you remember who's using it. His opponent taunts him to try necromancy, and that lands the way a bad idea always does. Since Archimon's eye answer is a dead giveaway that the hidden art is still there, watching back. Blue and purple energy blooms around him as the necromantic power finally leaks through the mask, and the onlookers immediately start making excuses for the opponent. They swear Randall just dodged and must be taking it easy, which is hilarious in the same way a cracked wall is hilarious right before the ceiling gives up. The fight surges again, and someone screams for death with a sword raised, then the whole place erupts in red light and wreckage. Through the smoke, all that comes back is confusion, then the blunt little realization that he disappeared, which is a fancy way of saying the target was not standing where the idiots expected him to be. At the formal table, the conversation turns cold and careful, with a man telling a woman he should not act on personal feelings, then laying out the ugly reason anyway. He stepped up to defend the honor of his late mother, and he makes it clear he's not bound by family rules here, so nobody needs to worry about whether he's allowed to get involved. Back in the clash, the other side spells out the whole combat doctrine like it's some noble lecture. He does not fight losing battles. Its imperial swordsmanship is predation, meaning you overwhelm the enemy by dumping mana on them until they stop being a problem. A lion roars through the lesson, an eagle hangs there for temperance, and Archimonde stands with his sword ready, looking like he's already decided which part of this philosophy he intends to break. His opponent spits out an insult and calls him a little rat, which is a bold move seconds before the red energy detonates again. The blast sends the foe flying. Then the air fills with another violent surge, and a monstrous face with glowing cross eyes, and a demonic body that looks like it skipped several steps of being human, while Archimonde basically tells the bastard not to make him laugh, and swears he's the one who's winning this. He drives the sword in against that red power, then gets buried under a storm of blade projectiles and collision energy, suspended right in the middle of the mess like the fight decided to freeze frame on the worst possible part. No elegance left, no safe lane, just Archimonde forcing his way through the clash and refusing to let the attack finish without taking him with it. He finishes the clash and the sword's answer comes back hard. The weapon only wakes the instant it collides with a mana-infused blade. So when the two sides fully meet, the air tears open with a brutal release, and Archimonde can tell the transformation is no longer theory or bragging rights, just completed work with teeth. Then somebody gets their face rearranged for asking the wrong question, and the follow-up is even less polite. The next blow keeps coming until the whole exchange tips from duel into punishment, and the poor bastard is left trying to understand how his own neck suddenly feels like it got voted off the island. Now the victor starts talking like this is a courtroom instead of a beatdown, ordering the defeated man to confess, kneel, bow his head, and get crushed under the weight of his sins. The curse answers in the most obnoxious way possible, crawling out invisible force until the whole thing erupts into a full-body spiritual mugging. Elsewhere, a miner looks up and realizes something enormous is overhead, which is never a fun sentence to live through. A destructive impact follows, and somewhere in the aftermath, a girl is freaking out, while a man in a study just calls it a disaster. Like that helps the floor stop shaking. Archimonde then pulls off the useful part of necromancy that nobody sane wants to hear about, and successfully mimics Count Conwell's session with the dead's voice technique. He's also flipping through a worn leather book packed with strange notation, and the real problem on his mind is that priest bastard who looked ready to exterminate the whole mess before it even started. Reports start coming in about sightings at the mine, and the sketches make the answer painfully clear: undead. That is enough to light the fuse on everyone involved, especially when someone in white calmly decides real combat is the best form of research while staring down a woman across the table like this is academic. The Duke's order comes through next, assigning a protector to accompany the young master for his safety, which is a fancy way of saying someone higher up expects trouble and wants a witness. The companion is then reduced to a glorified lump of charcoal for research purposes, because apparently standing still is now part of the job description. Then everything snaps back into violence. A scream cuts through the noise as the ground trembles, the undead come shambling towards civilians, and panic spreads fast enough that even the brave stuff starts looking ornamental. Archimonde answers with a glowing strike that floors multiple enemies at once, the kind of clean hit that makes the dead look inconvenient instead of terrifying. He follows it with a heavier release of force, and for once the battlefield does what he tells it to, instead of the other way around. Archimonde stands in the cave with that ugly purple glow crawling off him like the place itself regrets letting him in. The others are still trying to catch up, but he's already looking past the dead things and straight at the real problem, the one hiding behind the mess. Then the questions start flying. The dark-haired one wants to know when those undead even began showing up, and that's the part nobody likes, because it means this isn't random garbage, it's coordinated garbage. Before anyone can settle on panic, a man grabs a younger guy and starts shaking answers out of him with his hands instead of his mouth. The accusation is simple enough: he begged for help for 2 months and got nothing, which is a lovely way to discover your support system is a brick wall with a badge. The anger turns uglier when the bodies come into view and the memory behind them hits hard. His father worked day and night in the mine, died there, and now all that labor is reduced to a corpse on the ground. So the son breaks down and asks why they have to suffer like this, like somebody upstairs is keeping score and laughing. Amid the chaos, a formal-looking figure just stands there calm as a tax clerk, which is a little offensive when everything else is falling apart. Then something answers that stillness: Archimonde. The name lands, his eye flashes with recognition, and the whole situation suddenly gets a lot less casual. A servant steps in beside the young master and says he'll handle things here, which is a brave line to say while the dead are still moving. Then he invokes the spirits of the innocent who died in sorrow, tells them to follow his guidance, and the air fills with the sort of force that makes the enemy's day immediately worse. Archimonde stares at the weird phenomenon and asks what it is, because even he has to do a double take when souls start answering back. The explanation is soul resonance, and that sends him straight to the one word that matters: father. He gets pointed toward the mine, told to go straight up the mountain path, like this family reunion comes with directions and terrible timing. Then he pieces together what the spirits were really doing, thanking him for helping them pass on, and right after that, pleading for revenge. He repeats the word like it tastes strange, and beside him, his father's ghostly face starts to show through the air, which is a real awkward way to confirm a suspicion. The revelation follows right behind it. He might actually be the reincarnation of Archimonde, and that is the sort of sentence that changes a whole bloodline's mood. Archimonde tightens his fist around something luminous and draws his glowing sword with enough force to make the moment feel official. Across from him, the other figure barely gets out a warning, and the two of them lock into a stance that says somebody is about to learn a lesson in front of an audience. Then the white-haired boy gets named for what he is, Lord Klein Rhineland. Meanwhile, the reports keep stacking up in the most tedious way possible. One dead beast in the backyard garden, then another the next day, then 4, 5, 6, like somebody is counting trophies instead of corpses. That's when the red-tinted chaos kicks back in and people start reacting to the impossible part out loud. Did he really say he was Archimond? Yeah, and now the rumors are all over the place, which is a nice way of saying the whole room just realized the problem may be bigger than they hoped. Later, a figure with a lantern waits in an ornate hallway and calls out, cautious and half hoping for a normal answer. Young Master Klein is all they get before the tension starts crawling down the corridor again. Klein keeps walking up a brick path toward a glowing figure overhead, while some dark thing hangs nearby like it owns the air. He mutters a string of stunned little sounds, and then a black feathered creature with a glowing orange eye bursts in and caws like it's the one with the agenda. By the end of it, Klein is standing in a cemetery staring at the crosses and the dark stretch of land beyond them. No speech, no flex, just the quiet kind of bleak that says the next answer is buried somewhere inconvenient. Someone nearby finally asks why Klein came to the cemetery, like the pile of crosses and dead quiet weren't enough of a clue. He's still holding the lantern, which is doing a lot of emotional lifting for a guy standing in a graveyard with absolutely no interest in a normal conversation. Then the shock hits hard enough to blow the calm apart. A voice yells, "Young Master?" And the next thing that matters is the bodies, because there are multiple dead corpses sprawled out here, and Klein is now staring at them like the place just pulled a cheap trick on him. He goes rigid and blurts out the obvious horror, then immediately tries to salvage the situation with funeral rites. That is the move now apparently, standing over fresh bodies and deciding the polite thing is to get spiritual about it before anything worse starts crawling out. Cut to a white-haired figure tossing out a philosophy question like this is a lecture and not a prelude to trouble. The answer comes back neat and tidy, all about actions defining a being, which is exactly the sort of line people say right before someone puts a sword at somebody else's neck. And sure enough, the blade comes up to the dark-haired man's throat, but he knocks it aside with a clean deflection and keeps moving. He walks off while thinking the whole thing through, deciding he's not convinced and refusing to be treated like some atrocious devil of the continent, which is a very specific complaint to have while armed. Elsewhere, the scale jumps straight into disaster mode. A massive creature looms over a fallen body in the ruins, while another battle smolders across the cityscape, with glowing symbols raining down and combatants fighting under a stupidly dramatic power display. The fight keeps escalating as white-haired and brown-haired fighters trigger cyan power and hold fire in reserve, then issue commands like they still have a battle plan left. The skeleton army answers the order and charges, which is a pretty rude way to confirm that the dead also take instructions better than most living troops. The battlefield turns into a three-way mess of impacts, cyan bursts, and something huge pressing in from below. One fighter taunts the other with Dalton's mercenaries and their obsession with power, which is rich coming from a person currently clutching cyan energy like it pays rent. Then everybody stops pretending this is a duel and starts swinging in a full-on melee, with bodies airborne and explosions punching holes through the air. Amid the wreckage, someone barks at the young master to move and gets them out through the slaughter lane before the whole place collapses into a bad memory. Now the necromancy finally gets loud. A voice releases the bindings, shrouding the bodies, cyan power floods the hands, and the spell swells until two figures are trapped in a swirling vortex above, while more magic keeps pouring out like the caster opened a dam in their ribs. From that surge, the skeleton warriors start manifesting in force, rising around the caster and his ally until the whole formation looks like a dead army remembering its schedule. At the center stands the commander with a sword, glowing in blue-white aura like the world's worst answer to a battlefield problem. The troops try to break through anyway, with Vanguard ordering the charge and Dunkel confirming the retreat, which is a charmingly chaotic plan. It lasts about as long as expected before a skeletal beast slams down from above and blows the formation apart, sending soldiers scattering like someone kicked over a tray of knives. After that, it becomes close combat hell. Skeleton warriors crash into human soldiers. A larger creature rises below, and then a massive blast tears the two sides apart so violently that both armies get flung through the air, like the fight itself is embarrassed. A cyan beam cuts across everything and steamrolls both sides at once, because subtlety took the day off. When it clears, warriors are left standing among fallen bodies in an icy blue wasteland, which is just a neat way of saying the battlefield has stopped pretending to be survivable. Someone looks back and pushes on anyway, telling the young master to believe in them until the end. That's the sort of line you only say when the road ahead is awful, and the response comes next in pure stubbornness. How much further, as if distance is the real enemy here. Then the answer turns personal. The power in his hand flares as he declares, "This is me," and he unleashes it with a face that says whatever's coming next is getting hit first and argued with later. The final image is a nightmare shrine of hanging bodies circling a central pillar of fire. No speech, no comfort, just a brutal little display that says the dead are still very much part of the conversation. Archimond stands in the middle of a firelit ruin, while the missing villagers hang around him like a nightmare decoration, and the people watching can only stare in horror as the captives beg for it to stop and to be killed. The guy above them takes one look at the setup and answers like this is all working exactly as planned, which is a grim kind of validation to receive. Then the cloaked bastard explains the trick. This magic turns people into familiars, which is a very fancy way to say he steals their bodies and calls it craftsmanship. He leans in with that predator stare, reaches out with a decorated hand, and acts surprised to find Archimonde here at all, before the name lands with all the grace of a tombstone. The devil of the continent, Lord Archimonde. Somewhere in the chaos, someone remembers finding others in hiding, and the answer is pure panic when the woman pops out and blurts that they were hiding, as if the word itself should have been obvious. Then the story turns into a history lesson nobody asked for, with hands joining in a pact, the event getting a proper title, and the whole Archimonde incident being laid out like a disaster report, with better branding. The details hit harder from there. Archimonde, sword in hand, supposedly ignored conventional warfare and devastated the continent outright, which is a very rude way to handle a battlefield. And the only thing that finally stopped him was hero Berkel Rhineland cutting him down, because apparently even monsters have to file paperwork when a proper hero shows up. Back in the present mess, a glowing red sphere with a cross-shaped flare hangs there like some cursed badge of authority, before a massive clawblade tears somebody down, and a multi-eyed head rises out of the red haze like it pays rent here. The beast drops its clawed hand, then slams a fist into the ground hard enough to toss a human around, which is a pretty strong argument for not standing near it. A towering, grotesque thing looms over the field while a woman in dark clothes stands right in front of it, because subtlety has died and nobody buried it properly. She gives the order to crush the two into pulp, and the creature answers by driving a massive fist down with enough slashing force to turn the air into a meat grinder. The masked fighter keeps moving through the mess and warns the young master that this is dangerous, which is the sort of line you say when the plan is already on fire. Then Archimonde's eye snaps open, and he drives upward into the red monster with a burst of energy, eating the recoil a moment later when the thing answers back and throws him through the blast. He lands in the debris with dust spiraling around him, then straightens up like getting launched was just a warm-up stretch. Now the monster fills the field, all spikes and a glowing central eye, and Archimonde squares up with a two-handed grip on his sword, watching it from a safe distance right up until it lunges again with that ugly swoop nonsense. Bro answers with a clean white slash that carves into the monster, then keeps the pressure on with a second and third strike before the thing can recover its dignity, which it never had much of to begin with. He snaps a warning while holding his ground, telling it not to lay a finger on the young master, and the knight comes in from below with a downward cut to finish the exchange the hard way. The knight gets launched for his trouble, hitting the ground with a rough grab, while Archimonde keeps his footing and watches the mess unfold. The guy doesn't stay down long though, already twisting midair into a counter like getting flung was just part of the choreography. The creature keeps swinging, and the woman starts showing the damage in ugly spreading cracks across her form, like the thing holding her together is running out of excuses. Then it clips the knight again and sends him crashing downward, while its body comes into view in full, all those glowing orb-like lumps packed over it like a nightmare somebody tried to decorate. She finally admits what happened, basically saying the young master threw himself in front of her with a body that can barely keep up, and that hits harder than the creature's fist. Then she locks in anyway, straight-faced about doing it for me, and immediately hating herself for ever suspecting a man like that could be Archimonde. Archimonde answers the regeneration problem the only way he can, by declaring there's one way to repay the shame and throwing himself back into the clash. The monster heals itself again, so he snaps at the situation, readies his blade, and goes from frustration to commitment in about half a heartbeat. He carves a wide arc through it, then drives the sword straight down with full force, and the creature finally pays for all that sloppy immortality with a white flash and a pile of scattered remnants. One clean finish, which is nice for once, even if nobody in this mess looks like they're enjoying it. The woman stares at the wreckage and at Archimonde like he just solved a math problem with violence, muttering that it really is beyond her imagination. Then the narration shifts into the ugly little confidence sermon behind her power, where all those experiments supposedly pushed her knowledge past the singularity and let her make a variant nobody else can touch. Because of course, she's also the one calling this innate talent, like the phrase itself won't stop repeating in her head. Power spikes, the battlefield turns into a contest of bad ideas, and somebody immediately dismisses brute force as a waste of time compared to hitting the core. Talent gets treated like a throne with legs. The order comes down to crush the target, and the enemy has to face that activated creature head on, while the attacks start stacking from every direction. A massive pink-purple blast slams in, and the warrior meets it head on before getting shoved back by a magenta blade or beam for the effort. After that, the fallout turns messy fast, with the character staring at the aftermath and asking what in the world this is, like the battlefield forgot to send her a warning label. Her hand flashes with some glowing pattern as a splash effect hits, and then she looks up at the dark structures looming overhead like she's just noticed the room has gone fully hostile. The next thing she knows, she's waking up somewhere unfamiliar, hearing a voice ask if she's awake, which is a very polite way to interrupt absolute confusion. A dark figure looms over the red-haired woman in the new place, and she blinks like she's trying to decide whether this is a rescue or a worse problem. When she hears the question about the afterlife, she answers the obvious thing with a shaken, "The afterlife exists?" The armored warrior just stands there with that spiked staff, all calm menace and no wasted motion, then tells her wanting to leave means she doesn't understand the situation. He even asks, "Shall we begin?" like this is some formal hobby, and not a disaster with a weapon. She starts tearing up, muttering about the judgment of her sins, which is a pretty fast emotional collapse for somebody who just got dropped into mystical court. Then Archimonde's name gets invoked as the power source, and the spell answer comes down on her with neat little attack symbols, like being condemned by office software. The name lands, and she freezes on Archimonde, while the narration spells out the guy's reputation. Devil of the Continent, the beginning and end of all necromancy. That is not a flattering title, but it does explain why the room suddenly feels worse. Then the control slips into her body, and she realizes she's not acting on her own anymore. She fights it anyway, panicking that her own limbs are moving without permission. And Archimonde goes straight at the target with the ugliest charge sheet imaginable. Innocent people turned into test subjects, kidnapped, tortured, and used up like spare parts. He keeps going, dragging the accusation back 200 years and hammering the old theme home. The dead were never meant to be tools, but this guy used them like disposable equipment. Then he seals the threat with one clean declaration. From now on, the target becomes his tool, and the magic display makes sure nobody mistakes that for a metaphor. The curse hits with force, yanking the victim upward in a brutal pull, while Archimonde descends with purpose, already looking like the winner before the fight has finished standing up. He lands in a victory pose with his sword, tells her if that's how it is, then they'll meet again, and walks off with the colder version. We will meet again soon. She hangs there inside the curse, reaching upward while screaming in pure panic. And that is the part where the smug plan stops feeling cute. The spell did its job, and the room gets to sit with the noise. Somewhere else, a servant is calling for young Master Klein, shouting for him to come out like this is a normal housekeeping issue. Another voice snaps back that this is bad. The purification ritual is almost due, and then laughs bitterly about the same excuse being used last time before somebody got strung up for it. Klein is asleep in a dark chamber, dead to the world, and offensively peaceful about it. Then he jerks back as a huge cloaked thing grabs him in the rain, creatures howl in alarm, and the whole setup goes from nap to nightmare in about half a second. Finally, a masked man squares up and throws the obvious question straight at the target. Weren't you the one who wanted me dead more than anyone? It's a neat little reminder that everybody in this mess already has a grudge, which is usually how things get bloody. The masked man fires back like he's the one holding the leash, snapping that the question is rich coming from a guy who already dragged him through all this water torture nonsense. Same old problem in this mess. Everybody shows up with history, and all of it is bad. A formal-looking man keeps a younger figure pinned with rope, then greets young Klein like they're on polite terms and not in the middle of whatever this is. He even explains he was away handling urgent business at the Holy Order, which is a nice way to say he was busy elsewhere while the room stayed unpleasant. Klein spots the thing hovering over him and immediately clocks it for what it is, warning nobody to say a word. Too late for subtlety though, since the cloaked ectoplasm is already breathing down his neck, and he's swinging first just to buy a second. Then he lands a hit with a blast of cyan energy, so bright it looks offended to be here at all. When the dust clears, the thing stands revealed as Archimonde, and he gets hit with the absurd claim that even death and rebirth did not manage to change what he is. Archimonde answers with the coldest line in the room, warning that death still catches everyone eventually, and ordering him to die by name. The response comes with old wounds attached, a reminder that the so-called purification ritual was just daily water torture, with better branding. Archimonde hears a nasty little echo in those words since they sound a lot like someone he once knew. Back then, that person talked about the future of children, and now the speaker twists it into the future of a young being, basically arguing over the fine print while refusing to let the blade go through. He sees his opening and goes for it, only to realize the sword is gone. Of course it is, because the universe does enjoy making a thief of the guy who needs a weapon right now. The stolen silver sword ends up in someone else's hand, and the guy holding it looks far too pleased about the situation. Archimonde gets knocked back into the air, and the nobleman chases him with his blade already drawn, which is rude but efficient. The sword drops on him hard enough to pin him, then an explosion or shockwave throws him away like the room itself is done with him. He tumbles through collapsing debris, hits the wreckage, and winds up sprawled out while the whole chamber keeps falling apart around him. When the dust settles, the nobleman is still standing, which is never a fun sentence if you are the one on the floor. He looks down at the defeated attacker and starts to recognize him, which is usually the part where things get personal again. The masked man draws a clean line in the sand, telling him to drop the killing intent or become an enemy of House Rhineland. Kuhak just answers with recognition instead of fear, and that's the exact sort of reply that means he knows this fight is about to get worse. Kuhak's face twists into something feral and dangerous, and then he moves like the room can't keep up with him. Golden energy bursts out as he drives in with a technique so heavy it starts carving script and runes into the air, which is a fancy way of saying the next hit is not going to be gentle. Kuhak finishes loading the hit, and the air around his sword goes tight like it already regrets being here. Then he lets the full thing loose, the strike coming down with enough force to make the whole room feel like it got drafted into the fight against its will. He follows through with a nasty little declaration. If this keeps going, we are the ones in danger. The sword flares red and pink as he keeps pressing forward, and somebody warns that the mansion is collapsing, which is a pretty rude thing for a mansion to do in the middle of an ambush. Kuhak snaps straight at the masked man with red energy surging off the blade, then lands another hit wrapped in green-edged marks like the attack is trying to cosplay as a sacred diagram. He calls it God's Judgment Rhineland, which is a lot of confidence for a guy swinging in a house that is actively falling apart. Then the focus jumps elsewhere to a white-haired figure laying out why things were kept quiet in the first place, while the smaller one stands there absorbing it. The explanation is basically damage control for bad timing, and the key detail lands hard. Dunkel's report says the body had no magic power. That's the problem no one can keep ignoring. And the next line says it plain, nobody even knew this existence was there, so they need to acknowledge it before it's too late. The answer is just as blunt, a single word with all the charm of a grave marker, necromancer. The figure strides forward, and the shadow eats the frame, which is usually a bad sign unless you're the one doing the eating. Then comes the ultimatum, let it perish or don't pretend you're in control anymore. After that, someone turns away and starts talking like stopping him was never really on the table. So Klein, he begins, and the woman answers with icy recognition. I understood. Grand Duchess Hellion. The last beat lingers on Hellion in profile, her name hanging there while the conversation keeps sliding into something bigger than a name drop. At this point, the room has gone from a fight to a very expensive misunderstanding with swords.